When 21-year-old Alan McCulla walked out of his mother's home on Denmark Street in North Belfast on May 28, 2003, two men stood waiting for him. Both wore the badge of the Ulster Defence Association, the UDA. Nobody shouted, nobody fought, just a quiet walk to a waiting car and a door pulled shut behind him. What Alan McCulla didn't know was that he'd just taken his last steps as a free man. McCulla himself belonged to that exact same loyalist paramilitary organization. He'd climbed the ranks to become military commander of West Belfast Brigade's C Company, the notorious unit led by Johnny Mad Dog Adair through some of the most savage internal loyalist conflicts Northern Ireland had ever witnessed. But within that violent world, power could evaporate overnight, and mere suspicion could sign your death warrant. During February 2003, after people suspected his involvement in killing Southeast Antrim Brigadier John Gregg, McCulla got forced out of Northern Ireland entirely. Several months passed before he returned to Belfast. 1 month after that return, those two UDA men appeared at his door. They drove away together that day, and nobody ever saw Alan McCulla breathing again. Smash that subscribe button for Cold Files unlocked immediately. This represents the story of Mo Courtney, a UDA paramilitary who survived the bloodiest feuds in loyalist history, an individual who operated at the dangerous intersection of paramilitarism and criminal profit, a senior Red Hand Commando figure who ultimately got convicted in a multi-million-pound organized crime operation. We're examining William Samuel Mo Courtney, born in Belfast during 1963, and who operated alongside Johnny Mad Dog Adair and C Company throughout the most violent years of the Troubles, who survived assassination attempts, brutal internal UDA power struggles, and the vicious feud with the UVF, who transformed from paramilitary gunman into drug kingpin controlling the Shankill Road narcotics empire, and who allegedly masterminded the murder of Alan McCulla. A shared meal, casual conversation, then 2 bullets to the head and a hastily dug grave. Activate those notifications right this instant, because this case powerfully demonstrates how Northern Ireland's paramilitaries evolved from political violence into organized crime syndicates. How the ceasefires didn't stop the wars, they merely changed what people were fighting to control, and how one individual navigated decades of loyalist bloodshed to emerge as a drug empire boss. The early years, teenagers to killers. William Samuel Mo Courtney entered the world in Belfast on July 8, 1963, in a city already clenching its fists for violence. By the time the late 1970s arrived, he was running around with a gang of teenage boys from the Shankill Road and surrounding streets. They'd gather near the Buffs Club on Century Street. Restless young men, angry at the world, desperately searching for purpose. One member of that teenage gang was Johnny Mad Dog Adair. That friendship would fundamentally shape absolutely everything that followed. During 1984, the entire group filtered into C8, one of the teams that formed C Company of the Ulster Freedom Fighters, the UDA's most terrifying battalion. What had started as simple street loyalty rapidly hardened into paramilitary discipline. Over several months, they got absorbed into a structure deliberately built for violence. On November 23, 1985, Courtney and Adair stood side by side at Belfast City Hall for the Ulster Says No rally, protesting against the Anglo-Irish Agreement. That political deal ignited absolute fury throughout loyalist areas, and recruitment numbers surged dramatically. C Company expanded rapidly, so did the bloodshed. Courtney's early reputation wasn't built on ideology whatsoever. He became known as a petty thief, even getting subjected to a punishment beating by senior UDA figures for committing burglaries on the Shankill. But he didn't drift away from the organization. Instead, he got pulled deeper inside. William Winky Dodds, an older family friend, became the one who changed everything. He started with Courtney alone, taking him aside and personally teaching him how to handle weapons, how to move tactically, how to think like a soldier. Soon enough, Adair and others from Old Park got brought in. What had started as a loose gang of teenagers got reshaped into something far more disciplined and far more lethally dangerous. They weren't just being taught to fight anymore, they were being systematically prepared for active service. What had been street bravado transformed into something more organized, more deliberately calculated. By the mid to late 1980s, Courtney was actively operating as a gunman. By 1987, he was allegedly involved in killings. Throughout West Belfast, he would go on to lead an active service unit, a small, tightly controlled team specifically tasked with carrying out attacks. Years later, during 2002, he got questioned in connection with the 1989 murder of solicitor Pat Finucane. No charges ever followed, but by that point, Mo Courtney was no longer a teenager standing outside a club on Century Street. He was a man completely shaped by war, and the war remained far from finished with him. Share in the comments where globally you're watching from, because what unfolded next transformed loyalism forever. The power struggles, war inside the war. By the time the late 1980s arrived, Mo Courtney's loyalty was no longer blindly unquestioning. Inside the UDA, serious frustration was building up. Younger hardliners genuinely believed the leadership had grown too comfortable, more interested in extortion schemes, racketeering operations, and lining their personal pockets than actually fighting Republicans. Courtney was one of those who loudly argued the movement had completely lost its edge. In his view, the war wasn't being fought aggressively enough. Whispers of internal revolt began following him. Courtney became directly linked to attempts to unseat senior UDA figures, power plays that ultimately collapsed completely. Not because peace had broken out, but because the Stevens inquiries began exposing direct links between loyalist paramilitaries and elements within the security forces. As scrutiny intensified dramatically, the old leadership fell away. A completely new order emerged throughout the 1990s. Courtney was part of it, aligned very closely with Johnny Adair. During 1991, Courtney got jailed for robbery, theft, and hijacking. Inside the Maze prison, he absolutely didn't fade into the background. Alongside Adair and loyalist gunman Michael Stone, he became a genuinely prominent figure among the loyalist inmates. At one point, they even met DUP politician and then Lord Mayor of Belfast, Reverend Eric Smith, to discuss the possibility of future prisoner releases. A clear sign of how blurred the lines between politics and paramilitarism had become. Prison didn't soften him whatsoever. He built a reputation as a fearsome fighter, and when loyalism violently turned on itself, during 2000, during the bitter feud between Adair's C Company and the UVF, Courtney took a leading role. On August 19, 2000, the loyalist feud exploded onto the Shankill Road during the so-called Day of Culture. Gunmen opened fire on UVF members barricaded inside the Rex Bar. Courtney was identified as one of the shooters. 3 people were wounded. Others got beaten in the street, as C Company brutally asserted control. The war inside loyalism was no longer hidden whatsoever. If this devastating story has you completely captivated, smash that like button immediately. The shift to crime, ideology to profit. Adair was soon back behind bars. While imprisoned, he aligned himself with the Shukri brothers of North Belfast. On the outside, Courtney and other Adair loyalists followed suit, and the focus shifted dramatically from ideology to pure profit. Drugs replaced political rhetoric. Power now meant controlling territory. Territory meant controlling narcotics, and narcotics meant generating serious money. By that point, the war had fundamentally changed. So had the men fighting it. The Courtney and figures aligned with him, including D. Coleman, became increasingly linked to large-scale narcotics activity throughout West Belfast. Coleman wasn't a public UDA figurehead whatsoever. He operated deep inside the loyalist underworld, part of the old C Company power base that had shifted from paramilitary violence to organized crime operations. The structures originally built for conflict were now moving drugs. Throughout loyalist heartlands, cocaine and heroin replaced political slogans. Controlling territory meant controlling drug supply, and those who once enforced ideology were now widely associated with brutally enforcing profit margins. C Company hadn't disappeared. It had evolved, with Courtney and Coleman running narcotics rackets and flooding the entire area with cocaine and heroin. During late 2002, Adair and John White got expelled from the UDA. Courtney stood loyally by Mad Dog, acting as chief guard of the heavily fortified Shankill home nicknamed the Big Brother House. But distrust was creeping in rapidly. Adair grew deeply suspicious of Courtney's ties to the Shukri men he now viewed as rivals. Believing betrayal was imminent, he allegedly dispatched a hit team. Courtney survived, tipped off at the last moment by someone inside C Company. From that point forward, the alliance was completely dead. Then during February 2003, Southeast Antrim Brigadier John Gregg, one of Johnny Adair's fiercest rivals, got shot dead in a taxi near Belfast docks. Adair was widely believed to be involved. Loyalism erupted violently. On the day of Gregg's funeral, armed UDA men descended on Adair's Boundary Way home. The message was brutally simple: go. Police arrested Adair soon after. Without him, C Company collapsed completely. The unit that had ruled West Belfast fractured almost overnight. Adair's wife Gina, John White, and about 20 loyalists, including Alan McCulla, fled to Scotland and England. The exile, desperate to return home. Exile proved far less glamorous than it sounded. McCulla ended up in Lancashire with the so-called Bolton Wanderers. His girlfriend returned home with their child. He got left sleeping on a camp bed in Gina Adair's house, sharing cramped space with other displaced loyalists. By April, he desperately wanted back. Homesick and isolated, McCulla contacted Mo Courtney, now the dominant force in West Belfast, asking permission to return. His mother reportedly pleaded his case desperately. Desperate to prove himself, McCulla was later linked to a shooting attack on Gina Adair's house in Bolton, a clear signal that he had switched sides. He also offered Courtney something more concrete: the location of a buried drugs haul and other sensitive information tied to Adair's circle. A deal got struck, and Alan McCulla came home, back to Belfast, back to the organization, back into the grip of men who never forgot anything and rarely forgave anyone. When those two UDA men arrived at Alan McCulla's home, they reassured his mother he would be perfectly safe. McCulla left with them willingly. At first, Absolutely nothing seemed unusual. They drove to the Hilton Hotel in Temple Patrick, sat down for a meal, and talked. The conversation, it was later reported, centered on the Bolton Wanderers, the exiled loyalists, and the location of hidden drug caches. It felt like routine business. On the way back, the car suddenly pulled over. There was a struggle. McCulla got shot twice in the head. He vanished. For days, police searched desperately. Then on June 5th, workmen in Monkstown, Newtown Abbey, noticed disturbed ground. Beneath it, Alan McCulla's body, buried in a shallow grave. The UDA claimed responsibility under its cover name, the Ulster Freedom Fighters. The killing, they stated, was retaliation for McCulla's alleged role in John Gregg's death. But the execution was about considerably more than simple revenge. The power grab, switching sides. After Gregg's killing, the mainstream UDA under Jackie MacDonald turned violently on Adair. Loyalists got given a stark choice: defect or get swept aside. Word spread rapidly that an assault on Adair's Boundary Way base was coming. Mo Courtney saw precisely which way the wind was blowing. Adair's grip was slipping badly. Survival meant switching sides. In a calculated move, Courtney confronted Adair's mother-in-law, demanding the location of hidden weapons. When she couldn't deliver, he found an arms dump himself. Seizing guns and cash, he handed them over at the Heather Social Club, the new center of power on the Shankill. There, he broke publicly with Adair, calling him a treacherous bastard for the alleged hit attempt. The old regime was being torn down brick by brick. Courtney regained his influence within the West Belfast UDA and replaced Fat Jackie Thompson as brigadier. He was back in absolute control. As a result, it was he who Alan McCulla, tired, isolated, and desperate in exile in Bolton, called asking for permission to return home. He got his answer, and McCulla's murder shocked even hardened loyalists on the lower Shankill. The manner of it, the deception, the meal, the shallow grave, left a genuinely sour taste. Courtney, still viewed by some as too close to Adair for comfort, went into hiding, fearing retaliation. Within days, he and Ihab Shukri got arrested and charged with the killing. Courtney was found hiding in Carrickfergus. By that point, Courtney's alliance with Coleman had imploded completely. What had once been a partnership built on territory and profit collapsed into open hostility. Accusations, threats, shifting allegiances. In that violent world, fractures don't mend. They calcify. At one stage, tensions escalated so sharply that Coleman got effectively pushed out of Belfast after his home was allegedly targeted. Sources later claimed Courtney had placed him under threat. Without his former associate, Courtney faced pressure from rival dealers circling the same ground. And by most accounts, he had never fully replaced a man who had once helped him hold it all together. The trial and conviction, justice delayed. During 2006, Courtney was acquitted in the McCulla case at Diplock Court. The judge cited serious weaknesses in the evidence of family members and an anonymous witness, but the case didn't end there whatsoever. The Court of Appeal later ruled the acquittal unsound and ordered a retrial. Before it could begin, during January 2007, Courtney was brutally attacked on the Shankill Road by an old UVF rival, a stark reminder that post-feud grudges never fully fade. At the retrial, Courtney pleaded guilty to manslaughter. He received an 8-year sentence. His account was that he believed McCulla was to be kneecapped, a punishment shooting, and that someone else had fired the fatal shots. Even in prison, Courtney's past followed him relentlessly. During 2007, while serving time for the McCulla killing, He got named in a Belfast court affidavit as one of 2 alleged gunmen in the 1989 murder of Pat Finucane, a solicitor with a reputation as the IRA's lawyer. No charges followed, but the allegation resurfaced old shadows. After his release, Courtney returned to the Shankill. The violence didn't stay behind him. During 2013, he was convicted of assaulting Tracy Coulter at the Lower Shankill Community Office. The confrontation reportedly stemmed from tensions over drugs and local power. Coulter, daughter of slain loyalist Jackie Coulter, later saw her home destroyed in an arson attack. She blamed the UDA. Courtney was soon back in court, convicted of harassment and threatening campaigner Raymond McCord. He received a suspended sentence. But the deeper conflict was inside loyalism itself. By 2013, a bitter feud had erupted within the UDA's North Belfast Brigade. Dissidents sought to remove Brigadier John Bunting. West Belfast and Courtney were widely linked to the challenge. The organisation fractured again. Senior UDA figures reportedly offered reconciliation on one condition: Courtney and his allies step aside. They refused. Years after the ceasefires, the war for control hadn't ended. It had simply turned inward. Legacy. The cycle continues. Now, according to recent reports, Courtney has reached back into his past, contacting former ally D. Coleman and signaling that the door is open for a return. And this despite Coleman serving time for offenses including kidnapping, cocaine dealing, and violent assault. Courtney has reportedly told him there is still a place waiting. Even from behind bars, Coleman is said to have maintained contacts within the drug trade. Contacts Courtney believes could reinforce his grip on the Shankill market, especially as independent dealers chip away at his influence. For Coleman, the offer is simple: a return to familiar territory. But old betrayals linger. Sources suggest he has not forgotten the fallout, and trust in that world is a rare commodity. Whether the old partnership can be rebuilt, or whether it would ignite another feud, only time will tell. Mo Courtney's story is not unique in Northern Ireland's loyalist community. It's the story of how paramilitaries evolved after the ceasefires, and how the structures built for political violence were repurposed for organized crime, how the men who once fought for Ulster became drug dealers fighting for territory and profit. The UDA's transformation from paramilitary organization to criminal enterprise has been well documented, but individual stories like Courtney's reveal the human cost. The violence didn't end with the peace process. It just changed form, from car bombs to drug wars, from political murders to punishment beatings over territory. The communities that suffered during the Troubles continue to suffer now, not from political violence, but from the addiction, intimidation, and crime that filled the void. Alan McCulla's murder remains one of the starkest examples of loyalism's internal brutality. A young man, lured home with promises of safety, fed a meal. He then executed and buried in a shallow grave. His crime being on the wrong side when the power shifted. Mo Courtney survived decades of loyalist feuds, assassination attempts, and internal power struggles. He transformed from paramilitary gunman to drug boss, from ideological warrior to criminal kingpin. And through it all, he remained embedded in the same streets, the same organization, the same world of violence. The question remains: was Mo Courtney a soldier who turned to crime, or a crime boss who wore a paramilitary badge? Perhaps the answer is that in Northern Ireland's loyalist heartlands, the two were never really separate. Subscribe to Cold Files Unlocked for more UK true crime cases covered with detail and respect. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Turn on notifications for more investigations. But drop your thoughts in the comments. How do we break the cycle of paramilitary crime in Northern Ireland? This case reminds us that the Troubles never truly ended for some communities, that ceasefires don't automatically bring peace, and that the structures built for war can easily be repurposed for profit. For Alan McCulla and all those caught in loyalism's internal violence, for the communities still suffering under paramilitary control, for a Northern Ireland still seeking true peace. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there.